Joining me now to discuss the latest on what is transpiring in Israel and its implications back here at home, Democratic political strategist Joe Lestingi and Scottie Nell Hughes, back for her second visit today from the Tea Party News Network. We thank you both for being here. We want to talk. It's good to have you, Joe, and Scottie Nell, welcome back. We want to begin by talking about Secretary of State John Kerry's role in the peace process. Is he helping or is he hurting, Scottie Nell?
Well, it's funny. You never thought that you would actually be wishing that the former basketball star named Dennis Rodman was in charge of our political diplomacy. Because at this point, it looks like John Kerry's not doing too good of a job. But when you're sitting here and you're looking at, you have to realize what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with just Hamas and Israel. We're looking at Israel wanting to actually win the actual war. They're not really caring much about the PR war. They're caring actually about what's going on the ground, winning the war of what's happening. Hamas, on the other hand, not so much. They're looking at this as a global war. The Muslim Brotherhood, their big brothers, they're wanting to win actually the PR war. And so therefore, anything that they sacrifice there on the ground in Palestine is kind of martyrs, and they're going to get 99 virgins. So therefore, they would rather win this PR war, which it looks like they're winning, than necessarily the ground war. So as long as they can keep this going and keep the worldwide media giving them the dissension, thinking that they're the actual ones that are being the victims here, then they're winning. So, you know, poor Israel on the side right now is kind of having to fight this alone because John Kerry, as he just showed, really is not helping them when it comes down to it.
Well, Joe, speaking of PR and public perception, we would like to play for you something that John Kerry had to say, and then we'll get your reaction to the Secretary's comments.
The Israelis did not invite him.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu himself said to me, can you try to get a humanitarian ceasefire for this period of time? And if it weren't for his commitment to it, obviously the President of the United States and I would not be trying to make this effort. Now, either I take his commitment at face value, or someone is playing a different game here, and I hope that's not the fact.
Well, some would say that it seemed that Secretary Kerry could be calling the veracity of Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements into question. That would have to be counterproductive. What about this rift, Joe? Can Secretary Kerry recover from this?
Well, I think Secretary Kerry there was very clearly pointing out the argument that he was not invited was factually incorrect. Everyone knows that Netanyahu and the president have been in communication for a very long time now. So I think that, taken in the context that it was just played, is actually incorrect. He was combating the fact that he wasn't invited. He was clearly invited. He was unsuccessful, but there are deeper problems within that. And yeah, as Nelly pointed out, there is a PR problem right now for Israel. And whether it's earned or not, they do have a lot of things they need to work out here. In the end, people are dying, children are dying, and we need to stop the fighting. This is not too different from the Balkan situation from the mid-'90s or Rwanda in Africa. We need to stop the killing first.
Well, Joe, there's another situation afoot. It probably won't surprise you that Charles Krauthammer has a very different take on this. He believes the administration is part of the problem. We're going to take a listen to this, and then Scottie Nell, we want to get your comments on what the good doctor had to say on Fox News.
The Israelis did not invite him. The Egyptians did not want him. And he says he advanced a peace plan that was building on the Egyptian one. They didn't at all. It undermined it.
What about that, Scottie Nell? Did it undermine the peace process?
Yeah, I think it obviously did, because Egypt rejected. Let's talk about this peace plan that he proposed. It had billions in aid, which was actually without any disarmament to Israel. It recognized Hamas as basically the governing political body of the Gaza Strip, and they basically projected no security to Israel. It was a Hamas dream, and yet Egypt rejected it. So if this was something that Egypt wanted, then they would have actually accepted this open arms, because if anything, this would have hurt Israel. But Egypt rejected it, which shows that Egypt is not going along with what John Kerry wanted. So you have to wonder, why was John Kerry getting involved? Or if he was invited, who was actually advising him and what he was saying? Because it obviously was not coming from Egypt.
Joe, your take on what both Charles Krauthammer and Scottie Nell had to say.
Well, obviously, Charles Krauthammer tried to play the same thing of him not being invited, which we know to be factually incorrect. And I appreciate that the Egyptians didn't get this. This is a very serious conflict that requires serious action. There is no bigger supporter of Israel than the United States of America, and we've made that very clear. And if you recall, during the elections when Hamas took over, we said as long as they have open and fair elections, we were going to recognize who won the elections both in the West Bank and in Gaza. Unfortunately, there is not going to be any peace here unless Hamas stops the rocket fire. And you're not going to get that without at least talking to someone in Hamas. This is not a situation that it should be taken lightly. I mean, these are real people dying and real people who right now who live in Gaza who have no infrastructure. They have no sanitation. The fighting has to stop. And that is what Secretary Kerry's goal is. There are hard lines on both sides, and this is a very tough negotiation. We got some humanitarian ceasefires which were critical, and we need to keep that going forward.
Well, while the fighting continues, there is another development we need to talk about. The UN Committee on Human Rights launching an investigation into Israel's action in Gaza.
Yes.
Now, the United States was the only nation to vote against this proposed inquiry. 17 other countries abstained, including France, Ireland, the UK, a host of others. When you see what is going on there, Joe, I thought this president was going to bring about new unity and the Europeans were going to be among our best friends.
Well, obviously the Europeans want to stay sort of out of this situation. There's no, and this is where I think Nellie's actually incorrect. I mean, this goes to show our support for Israel, and I think this was a statement to Israel that we're still your allies and you still have the right to defend yourself. And with the abstentions from everybody else, our vote was pretty important, and I think that is a bigger statement than anything else. The UN is targeting and looking really at Israel right now as the aggressor, and they've lost 6 facilities there. They've got some problems, and the UN does have a pretty loud voice. America, I think, stepped up and stood behind Israel on this one.
Loud voice of the UN notwithstanding, Scottie, Nell, is the UN part of the problem?
The UN is a part of the problem here. The UN obviously is very biased, which I find this to be very hypocritical considering the UN is on United States territory and they're located here. You know, that is the issue here. The reason why the Europeans abstained is because they know they have huge Muslim populations within their countries who have done nothing but violent riots these past few weeks about these protests, burning Israeli flags, just like they always used to burn American flags, and they don't want to see their own countries torn up by these violent Muslims that go out and riot in the streets. That's why they abstain from it, but they know that what is going on, that Israelis are not the aggressors in this. They're just trying to defend their territory, and yes, children have died because they're being used as, literally, Hamas is basically using them as shields right now to win the global PR war.
Let's let Joe get a comment on this. Go ahead, Joe.
Listen, if it was just that simple, I would give her all the credit in the world on this one, but it's not. This is a fight that's raged for decades. The European Union stayed out of this for international reasons. This is a fight that has raged in this area and will continue to rage for a long time. America is taking the lead. We are trying to get the fighting to stop and get the death tolls down. It is getting out of hand there, and we need to recognize that first. This isn't about extreme Muslims in Europe. That has nothing to do with the fight that is currently going where rockets are trading airspace right now.
Only about a minute remains, and New York, not only the home of the UN, but also the home of the eponymously named New York Magazine, an article where a columnist features the headline, "Israel is making it hard to be pro-Israel." And the verbiage includes this: the campaign of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza becomes a horrifying indictment. It is not just that the unintended deaths of Palestinians are so disproportionate, it's so forth and so on. Less than a minute.
Because it's all about the PR war there, and you know that. And Israel doesn't care. They care about saving the people on the ground. They care about saving their country. Not a year goes by without rockets, without terrorism happening within Israel from the outside.
Fair enough. Scottie, Nell, final 15 seconds to Joe. Joe, your take.
We have to stop the fighting. Gaza is one of the most densely packed areas in the world, and launching rockets in there, you're going to get collateral damage. Children are dying. There's nothing right about that. There is nothing right about hitting a school full of kids. And they have to figure out a way to do it tactically, which I think they will eventually.
Fair enough. We will have to leave it there. Joe, Scottie, Nell, we thank you for your time. We invite your comments on the story at home via Twitter and Facebook.